Good morning, everyone. My name is Annie Brink, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to note that all attendees will be placed on mute. However, we encourage you to submit any questions you would like answered in the question box located at the bottom right of your screen. If you don't see that box, look for the orange button near the top right of your screen. That is your control panel. Once you find that, the question box is down near the bottom. You can click that orange button to close and expand the box. So if it's blocking your presentation, you can close it and then just click it again to ask a question. Questions submitted will be anonymous, and we will respond to these throughout and at the end of the presentation. We're glad you could join us today, and we appreciate the opportunity to partner with the Chattanooga Chamber of Commerce for this webinar and hope that you will find it helpful. Now let me turn over the webinar to Jeremy Henderson, the Creative Director of the Chattanooga Chamber.
Thank you, Annie. We really appreciate Elliott Davis doing this with us. It's some really valuable information for our members, hopefully. We want to thank all of you guys for attending and showing up today. I'm going to turn things over to Jimmy Buddenberg, who's going to teach us all how to be cyber secure.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, I'll do that with the help of Brian Kirk. And so between the two of us, we'll go through some material today that hopefully will make you more cyber secure. And we appreciate the partnership with the Chattanooga Chamber as well. And so we're going to talk about some facts related to ransomware, which is very predominant right now. We're also going to talk about the impacts specifically around COVID-19 and the threats, the new threats that we're seeing, and then also specifically talk about remote workforce. So we've moved to a remote workforce. All of us on the call here are in our homes presenting, and so because of those changes, that's created some new opportunities for cyber criminals to take advantage of that. I will say though, first, before we start, the CARES Act was passed last Friday, and it's just a good reminder for all of us to be diligent in making sure that we're hypersensitive and hyper aware to the scammers that are out there looking to take advantage of us. Maybe it's our parents, maybe it's our kids, but really trying to get information from us. So a lot of people are expecting some checks from the federal government to help provide a personal stimulus. And what scammers will do is they will play on that and try to seek your personal information. So they'll try to seek your social security number, they'll try to seek your bank account information through email, through phone calls. And I would just say that information is already known. It's already known by the federal government. They know all of that information. So nobody should be asking anybody for that information for them to receive their check. So it's a good reminder. It's a good reminder for all of us just to make sure that our family members and coworkers are aware of that and don't fall for those schemes. So we're going to get started, and I'm going to cover just the presenter. So I'm the practice leader for our cybersecurity and risk advisory practice, and Brian Kirk is on. Hello, Brian.
Hey, how's it going, Jimmy?
Good. Brian is the leader of our cybersecurity practice. Together, we're going to present. The two of us have individual experience over 25 years in providing IT and security services to organizations throughout the U.S. and actually internationally as well. So we want to share some of our experiences in doing that. Elliott Davis, just briefly, we've been serving customers for the past 100 years, and we do that in a couple ways. We provide compliance services, tax and audit. We also provide a plethora of consulting services as well, and so management consulting, help with M&A transactions, fraud, obviously cybersecurity and IT risk, outsourced finance, and specifically around our cybersecurity and advisory practice. Very mature practice of 20 plus individuals that serve our customers and our community around cybersecurity, doing cybersecurity assessments, risk assessments, penetration tests, and then also other services like PCI assessments, HIPAA, GDPR, some of the data privacy requirements at the state level around CCPA as well. And so happy to be here and share with you just some of our lessons. So Brian, do you want to hit upon, we've got 4 lessons. This is the first. And so Brian, you want to take the first one?
Absolutely, Jimmy. So Yeah, so one of the things that we really try to impress upon organizations and a lot of the companies that we work with is that everyone's a target. So one of the misconceptions that a lot of companies have is that only big companies or well-known companies are targeted and found by cybersecurity criminals that are out there. So people often think that criminals are just kind of looking through the yellow pages looking for targets. So one of the things we really like to illustrate to people and to show to people is this slide that's on the screen right now. And it really documents how criminals obtain a number of their targets that are out there. One of the things you need to think about is that when you think about a service like Google that goes out and indexes the internet itself, and it's Google goes out, if you created a web page that you're selling something, eventually Google would find and index that information so that it would be searchable and findable. And what you need to understand is that criminals are doing the exact same thing. They're scanning the internet for vulnerable systems. They're not necessarily looking for brand names that are out there that they do target companies from time to time, but oftentimes the crimes themselves are crimes of opportunity. What this slide shows is a researcher put online a fake finance server, just put it on the internet, on the public facing internet. A number of companies over the last several weeks have stood up new services for remote users, remote access to their environment. And so just think about it from that context as well. You've put new services on the internet. This researcher put a fake finance server on the internet with a few known vulnerabilities associated with it. And really, what they were trying to do is to demonstrate to people how fast that server is detected, how fast that vulnerable system is detected and compromised. So you can see from the slide here, they put it on the internet, and within 2 hours, an automated service or an automated scanner like a Google-like service had discovered that financial system and had actually done a scan associated with it to look to see if it was secure. And 15 seconds after that scan had taken place, they'd already run an exploit, an automated exploit against that server to access one of those known vulnerabilities. And within 5 minutes, the bot had looked through the entire system, cataloged the information, and uploaded some information to another server somewhere on the internet that a hacker could review. You could probably just say, just from the amount of data that they have to review, it took them 2 days to come back and actually pull information off the system itself. That's probably just due to the volume of vulnerable systems and exploited systems that are on the internet and how long it takes them to get to the information itself. But one of the things to note is the hacker removed system data in this scenario, but if that system was vulnerable and perhaps connected to a customer internal network, then the attacker could have done something like put ransomware on it or tried to compromise the system and get access to other computers. The one thing really to highlight from this slide is, at this point, the attacker really doesn't know who this is. This could be Coca-Cola, this could be Microsoft, this could be General Electric, or this could be a baker in Chattanooga, or somebody that sells clothing, just a small clothing store. The attacker really doesn't care at this point. They just care that they found something that was vulnerable that they could potentially exploit for monetary gain. Jimmy, go to the next slide. So you might ask who these criminals are. And so this slide really kind of breaks down really the attackers that we're looking at from a criminal perspective. If you look from left to right on your screen, the attackers that we're listing here, they increase in the amount of money and resources that they have and the sophistication of their attacks as you move from left to right. So you have some recreational people that are out there. These are the people that are out there just basically seeing if they have the skills to hack a system, or they're just doing it for fun and games. This really was the whole security industry and the hacking industry about 12 years ago. But as people realized that there was some money to be had in this, we moved to a criminal contingent. These are just one-off people that are seeking to exploit systems for a little bit of monetary gain. Once again, this is not representative of a big segment of what we're seeing now from cybersecurity and cybercrime. Hacktivists are out there. They are not necessarily looking for monetary gain, but they're looking to advance their cause through using hacking and maybe targeting companies that they feel are doing unethical things. But by far the biggest contingent that we need to worry about from a business perspective is the orange group that's next to the top, and that is organized crime. So organized crime has realized how much money is to be had in cybercrime. And so they have organized themselves, and they are really the people that are behind most of the ransomware attacks and most of the business email compromise schemes that we see on a day-to-day basis. So one of the things I really try to emphasize to people is to understand that this is a business, this is a criminal enterprise, and so things that work like ransomware schemes and business email compromise schemes that gather money, they are invested in by these organized crime syndicates so that the schemes get more sophisticated and more advanced because they're making money for the organization themselves. The last organization to consider and the last threat group to consider is state-sponsored attacks. These are the North Koreas, the Russias, the Chinas, the United States. These are really advanced actors, and it's really difficult if you have one of these nation states after you because they have really large budgets and they have tools that they can use against an average business that are difficult to stop. So the impact on small, medium-sized business is something that we really, try to emphasize to people because, 50% of small to medium-sized businesses have been a victim of a cyber attack, and studies show that 60% of those attacks go out of business. So the implications of a severe ransomware attack or a large loss from a business email compromise oftentimes are not able to be recovered by a small, medium-sized business. So these starts to introduce some things that you need to consider from an organizational standpoint, like cyber insurance, and making sure that your cyber insurance policy matches your organizational risk. So we have had instances where organizations have lost a couple $1 million, for instance, in a business email compromise, and they did have cyber insurance, but it only covered $50,000 to $100,000 of that loss. So they hadn't actually taken the time to match their insurance policy with the actual risk that their organization had. So that's one of the things we do recommend organizations investigate having cyber insurance. And then we also recommend that they make sure that their insurance policy matches up with their overall risk exposure. So a lot of senior decision makers that we talk to on a regular basis, they just don't feel like they're a likely target. And unfortunately, a lot of companies invest a lot of money in cybersecurity solutions after they suffered a really significant attack. And so that's obviously a good time to put money into your organization, but you've already experienced a significant loss. So we really just encourage organizations to consider some of these preventative measures before it really becomes a serious problem.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I'm going to cover lesson 2, and that's the impact of ransomware and the fact that it continues to rise. And so most of us have heard about ransomware. I'm going to do a little education on what ransomware is. And it's interesting that 76% of the attacks, as you can see on the screen, happen during the night or on weekends. And that's typically for organizations that don't have staff or monitoring tools in place 24/7. An attacker can, leverage off hours work for most businesses to kind of execute on a lot of the steps here that you see on the screen. And so when an organization comes into work on a Monday morning, as an example, they realize that they've been hit. But the first step in this is the attacker sends a phishing email. It's not always phishing, but most of the time it does start with a phishing email. It can come through remote desktop protocol and access to systems that are accessible through the internet, that aren't patched, that aren't secured, like Brian talked about earlier. And once that happens, the user will click on that link. Step 2, when they receive that link, they'll click on that. And that really kind of executes then step 3, which is, that malware. When they click on that link, usually it has some sort of link to a site or some sort of an attachment that contains malware as they would execute malware, and it infects their system. Once their system is infected, now that system is used by an attacker to get into the network, and they can, and that's step 4. So step 4, there's a connection that's established through a CNC server, command and control server, that is the cyber criminals, and they're basically then just using that to control and execute commands on that infected PC or that infected system. And so there are ways to stop that outbound connection. If you have good network design in place, a good best practice is to really limit the amount of outbound traffic to really what is essential. And so even though an attacker, and what a lot of organizations we hear them say, wow, we've done all this investment, we've invested in all this stuff and infrastructure and all this work, but still it only takes one user to be able to compromise, to allow an attacker to compromise that environment. And that might be true, but I would say to you that doesn't necessarily have to be true, because there's other things, and Brian likes to say a common term is defense in depth. There's a number of things that still could be in place to stop that criminal from doing malicious activity. And so this would be one of them. You know, step 4 can be stopped if your network is configured properly. In this case, it's not. So the attacker gains access to the system. They might decide to execute on step number 5, which is encrypting your data, or they may decide to take days or weeks or maybe even a couple months to figure out how much access they can get to data on your network. Because if they can go undetected, the more and more systems and the more and more data that they can affect becomes, promotes, generates an opportunity for them to command a higher ransom. So in this case, step 5, files are encrypted. Only one way to unencrypt those files, you have to have a public key and a private key, and those together will be able to unencrypt those files. And so then step 6 happens, which is, the criminal starts communicating with the company, with the organization to say, I've encrypted your files. Do you want them back? Let's start talking about ransom, how that happens, and all that good stuff. So, if you've seen one of these screens, this is not a good day. This is an example of a ransomware screen. There's a number of screens that are out there. This is from Doppelpaymer ransomware from the summer of 2019. I'm going to use this as an illustration for what's happened most recently related to ransomware. But you can see on the left, the first note is, your network's been penetrated, your files have been encrypted, and they give you an amount to pay, and Bitcoin is usually the currency, and use the chat at the bottom of the screen. And if you need help, we're willing to help you through it. So they're very helpful criminals. So they'll give you chat. They'll give you, sometimes there's a number you can call, a service desk number for how to send and execute on Bitcoin, since most of us don't know how to do that. But they're very, very helpful. They'll also tell you, if you're not sure that we can actually decrypt your files, send us a couple files. So if you send them a couple files, they'll encrypted files, they'll send those files back, and they'll give you proof that they actually have the keys to be able to unencrypt those files. Typically, the ransom will start to go up after a number of days. You can see on this one, after 3 days, the price is increasing by 25%. After a week, it's 50%, and after 2 weeks, price is doubled. That changes depending upon the attacker, but typically there's an escalation point there, some sort of countdown. Now, the interesting thing on the right, so the same organization from summer 29 to December has now started to add a little more to their scheme. And that is, not only are we going to encrypt your files, and if you don't pay us, we'll go away, but we're going to leave your files encrypted, and or delete your files so you're without your files. In this case, they're actually gathering that sensitive data. So not only are they encrypting your files, but they're taking the opportunity to exfiltrate your data, and they will then they'll then hold your data ransom to say, if you don't pay the ransom, not only you're not going to get your files encrypted, but we're actually going to release these files to the public. And so that makes it that much more, let's call it, interesting for you to consider whether you want to pay. So it's not just now an impact on your business organization, but you've now put the people's data who is now in the hands of the criminal at risk. So we're seeing a big change in payout, and I'll show you some graphs related to this change and how the criminals have been acting. This one, you can see this ransomware attack is exactly that. This screen, it's basically saying that we have access to your data. We actually have access to your backup files. We'll talk a little bit more about backup files and how to create the best backups to get you out of a situation like this. And then you can see on the right that there's the chat box for how you can chat with the cyber criminal. With this change, and not only encrypting your data, but actually taking the data for ransom, seen an increase in the amount of payout. So the average ransom, we were doing these presentations, I think, a year and a half ago. The typical ransom was somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 was the average. There's all kinds of stats out there on the average. We're now talking about, the minimum of starting, you can see it at $50,000. And just over a 3-month period of time, over the last 3 months of last year, that average of 50 to 60 has gone up to over $100,000 as the average ransom. So a lot more at stake. The question that comes up, I'd say probably the number one question we get related to ransomware is, if I pay, what's the chance I'm going to get my data? And it's a great, great question. You are dealing with criminals. They don't have a lot of morals. They don't necessarily have much of a conscience, but they will give you your data 98% of the time. And it's because it's a business model. If they didn't give you your data, if you only got your data 10 or 20% of the time, most people would absolutely think twice and they probably wouldn't pay. But because it's pretty consistent that you're going to get your data back, then the chances of you paying goes up. And 97% of the time, when you get the keys, you're able to actually recover your data. The impact from a downtime perspective, you can think of this certainly as for manufacturing. It's really, really clear. I mean, if you're manufacturing, you usually know, every day of downtime is, $100,000, $1 million. We had one organization we were working with, it was 3.5 million a day that they were down. So every day really counts in terms of downtime. And the average number of days for a ransomware impact is 16.2. So pretty significant. This shows the ransomware market by share. So this is the different types of ransomware that's out there. There's two in the leading the market, Sodinokibi and Ryuk, which are very, very predominant strains of ransomware. And then also we talked about the attack vector. So this is actually how that ransomware enters your environment. You see email phishing up there at 26.3%. But what's not really, I wouldn't say it's not talked about a lot. We always hear about the phishing emails and people clicking, but those systems that are sitting out there on the internet, the illustration that Brian gave earlier of a system that is not patched, it's not secured, can be directly accessed and compromised by a cyber criminal through RDP. And so it's really important to make sure that you have your systems properly configured and your network properly configured. The ransomware target profile. So you can kind of see each of them have their own target market. So on the left is the size of the victims by number of employees. Average is 610 employees, but you look at Ryuk and Sodinokibi, so Ryuk, in the third quarter of last year, the average employee, the average organization size was 1,075, and from into Q4, that average size increased to 1,682. So they're going after bigger targets. So Nokibi, on the other hand, they're going after smaller targets. They went from 284 as average size to 73. So each has their own target market in terms of size. and then on the right, the average payout, you can see because those bigger targets are there, you're able to command a higher payout versus the smaller targets, there's smaller payout. So a lot more volume on Sodinokibi versus Ryuk, which is much higher in terms of payout. So that's a little education on ransomware. Now we're going to start talking a little more about COVID and some of the things that have happened recently. So Brian, you want to cover lesson 3?
Yeah, just circling on a couple of things that Jimmy just brought up, just to make everybody aware, just kind of reemphasize that, that business model, that last slide, just showing that business model. I think it helps a number of organizations to understand the mindset of criminals, to just kind of understand why you're a target and why they're being so successful, why so many attacks are taking place. But the one I wanted to really just zone in on, just in this time with all the COVID-19 and all of the work from home, is that slide that Jimmy had up about remote desktop protocol being one of the primary infection vectors for ransomware. So that's something, if you're a CEO, CFO, if you're an IT person, that we really would encourage you to have a discussion with either your managed service provider, your internal IT team. If that's something that's been enabled in your environment in the the last couple weeks, you want to circle back at that to make sure it's secure. Researchers have really seen over the last 3 or 4 weeks that we've had a 40% increase in the amount of remote desktop servers that are facing the internet right now. So you want to make sure that those are secure. If your team can secure those, that's great. If you need a third party, a trusted third party that you have in your market, or if you want to reach out to us to test your environment, that's something that you want to look at. But lesson 3 is just that you don't expect a lot of sympathy from the cybercrime syndicates themselves in a pandemic type situation, or in a really in any kind of serious situation. So we did have a public service announcement from the FBI on March 20th, where the FBI is seeing a rise in fraud related schemes related to the coronavirus pandemic. You could see that there are fake CDC emails, there are phishing emails that come out. What cyber criminals almost always seek to do is to capitalize on just fear, uncertainty, and doubt in users. So anything that they can send, that they know that all of us are hungry for information, and so therefore they know that people would be more likely to click on something to get a little bit more information. I put in parentheses at the bottom of this slide, and Jimmy kind of talked about it at the beginning, you really can expect a rash of phishing attacks against your users related to the stimulus bills that have been passed. The users are going to be very interested to know when they're getting money, whether they qualify for certain types of loans, whether there's loan deferments, things of that nature. There's going to be a flood of disinformation and a flood of people that are using these for nefarious purposes, whether it's to just get people to click and pay for a fake cure, or whether it's to get people to click on something and install something malicious on their machines themselves. The interesting thing here, we like to say there's no honor among thieves. So the hackers themselves, some of the more well-known hacker syndicates that are out there, they promised some of the more prominent news agencies like Forbes that they were going to lay off the healthcare industry. And you can look at the times, they're probably a little small, but I think these articles are actually 4 days apart, where the hackers promised not to attack healthcare providers with cyber attacks themselves. And then 4 days later, you could see that this is the actual group that had been interviewed before that said that they wouldn't attack healthcare providers. You could see that they attacked a vaccine test center. And obviously, they really like to look at healthcare providers and organizations that are in the manufacturing industry, because they know that any type of interruption at this time is extremely critical, and therefore people would consider paying a ransom just to get back operational, to keep moving, because lives may be at stake. So obviously it's a very serious time. There's some more headlines here just to kind of prove that the attackers themselves aren't letting up on an industry that's really flooded and working very hard right now. From a healthcare perspective, you can see the Illinois public health website was hit, a testing lab was hit, and you can see opportunistic attacks ramp up, right? So they're taking advantage of the fact that organizations are spinning up remote access very quickly. They're taking advantage of the fact that people are working from home and they may not have some of the security controls that maybe they had when they were working from the office itself. So you can see this slide right here is just showing, these are domain registrations. So you can think of domains as like CNN.com, Google.com, Amazon.com, but you can see a huge ramp up in domain registrations associated with coronavirus. And this is a normal thing. So most of these, the vast majority of these, are legitimate sites. So people that are looking for information associated with coronavirus, you guys probably have found some really cool trackers that are out there, like I'm using on a regular basis to see the amount of infections and things of that nature. Unfortunately, about 3 to 5% of these websites are malicious in nature. So people inherently trust websites that are forwarded to them that have things like coronavirus or the actual pandemic or natural disaster in the name itself. And therefore, criminals look to register these domains. So it's important that you use some type of tool that's actually filtering the domains, actually checking the domains to make sure that they're safe if you have users that are clicking on those. So website filtering can filter out those malicious sites, or you give some good user education to make sure that users aren't using their work PCs to click on these sites that may give them some information that they would like to see personally.
Hey, Jimmy and Brian, we had a question come through. What can you share about cybersecurity insurance and what different options there are, and if it's something that people should consider getting?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
good.
yeah, we do recommend cyber insurance for the majority of organizations. This is an industry that's matured. I was a little skeptical about it, just to be perfectly honest. When it first came on the scene, I was concerned that there may be a lack of payments where insurance companies might come in and say, well, you didn't cover these basic security controls. There are still some concerns about that, about you making sure you meet minimum basic security requirements. But our experience has been that cyber insurance has paid organizations for lost revenue, and also even assisted them. We're aware of cyber insurance companies that have paid ransoms. We're not necessarily endorsing that, but they've paid the ransoms in order to get organizations back and running. As I mentioned, the real important thing with cyber insurance is not just to go and just sign some standard cybersecurity insurance agreement. The main thing that you need to do as an organization is understand what your risks are, whether it's loss of manufacturing time or a business email compromise where we're wiring a lot of money around, like real estate type of company, and making sure your insurance policy matches your risk.
Yeah, and I would say too, it's also good if you have a breach, make sure that you engage your insurance carrier or broker very early in the process, because they might have relationships with organizations that they would want you to get involved in that recovery process, or certain protocols that you'll want to follow. So, in your incident response plan, hopefully they're one of the first calls that you're gonna make if you have some sort of issue. And oftentimes they have access to resources, and in the event of a breach, you're struggling for who to call next. If you feel like you need to negotiate a ransom, again, it's not what we're advocating, but they've got access to people that can do that, or to help do some forensic work, or you got to get legal involved to do some data breach disclosure. They've got a plethora of resources available, so it's very good. Yeah. I'd just say to keep asking questions. We love questions. It's really helps make the presentation more meaningful. So please, if you got a question, feel free to jump over to that chat box and enter it in, and we'll stop partway through and make sure we get your questions.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to cycle through some sample phishing emails that we're just pulling, just so that you kind of get a feel for some of the attacks that are coming through. This is one that you could see is purporting to be from a Ministry of Health news portal. As I mentioned, people are really anxious to hear from organizations like the CDC, the WHO, your local government, any of these types of agencies. So seeing a lot of phishing messages associated with those. You can see the subject here: coronavirus latest updates. Who wouldn't want to read that, right? You're going to want to see what that is. You're going to click that link. So that's important. Go to the next one, Jimmy. Yeah, so this is another one where very common for attackers to use UPS, FedEx, Amazon type shipping type of scams, but now they're actually customizing them to actually look like their coronavirus customer advisory notices. We're seeing a lot of this type of information come through. You can see here the safety measures that may be put in place specifically by a country or region. People will be really interested to open a safety measures PDF document that may be loaded with malware. So you could see that this is something that actually came through in China, but you can expect the same things to be coming through in the United States here in the next several weeks as this ramps up. Another government notice. This is one, looks like it's coming from the United Kingdom to their constituents. So you can see that, these are just, we really want to put these in kind of just semi-automatic. So you could just see these are really interesting things that a normal person would want to click on. So here's a new alert, just kind of talking about how a new transmission method of the virus. Now that it's airborne, people are really going to be concerned about that necessarily. And so you can see that the criminals there is no sympathy here, right? They're cutting straight to the chase. They're preying on people's fears, their anxieties, anything that they can get somebody to click a link or open an attachment itself. So just some overall recommendations from a phishing standpoint. These are things that you should be educating your users on. As I mentioned, users are blurring the line a little bit between their work and home systems because they're working from home. So, you need to educate your users. They need to be aware of online requests for any personal information. Jimmy mentioned the government has your social security number, it has your address. They're not going to be asking these types of things for your end users. So, just to really give them some good education while they're at home. Ways to check email addresses and links, hovering over a link, obviously kind of to see where that link is going to take you. Maybe just encouraging your users not to click on links at all in emails. If they see something that's interesting, they should be able to Google that and find that same site that has the information if it's legitimate. We do tell people to watch for spelling and grammatical mistakes. As we mentioned, this has become a real business type of environment now. So this is less common, where attackers, they actually hire fluent English speakers to write their communications. So we see less and less grammatical mistakes, but they still pop up. Generic greetings where you're not addressed by your name, but it's dear sir or madam. That's always something that's kind of a red flag. They don't really know who you are. They're probably sending this to thousands of people. And then anything that has an imperative in it, acting immediately, got to do this right now, click on this link immediately. Those are the types of things you want to caution your users not to do.
So I'm going to cover this fourth lesson, and then we'll go into some final recommendations that you can take forward. We're probably, I'd say 10 minutes or so out, so it's a good chance to get your questions in. If you have questions, we'll answer them now or at the end. So if you do have something, would love to hear from you. But with the collaboration tools, so there's a big push, really quick in a lot of cases to move to a remote work environment. I'm going to talk about some of the challenges with that, but we've all been able to leverage collaboration tools, which has been great. I wish I bought some stock in Zoom a few weeks ago, and it's and these guys are being great. They're giving away free licenses, they're giving away free versions, really helping Zoom. Google Hangouts is another one. There's a number of we use Microsoft Teams extensively, so a lot of enablement to allow remote collaboration among remote workers. But what that's also caused is a risk among internet trolls who will look to join these Zoom meetings or other meetings that aren't necessarily protected by from guests to join. So social distancing is our new term. Zoom bombing is going to be another term that's kind of come out of that. It's not necessarily new, but it's certainly happening more as there's more people using conferencing technology. And what criminals are doing is, they're using this technology and they're able to join in and they'll display or post some sort of graphic content that will not be a good thing on your meetings. They'll also lurk, so it's not just displaying graphic content or saying things that they shouldn't say to moderators of the group or panelists of a group, but they'll also join hoping to get intelligence information that might be confidential or proprietary to an organization. So you really need to think about protecting your collaboration sessions, whatever platform you might use. Requiring a password is a good best practice to make sure when you join that you either have a password or some sort of unique link that is used to join. Disabling join before host. We're not saying you have to enable all these things. You kind of need to just kind of pick which ones make sense for your organization. A lot of times it's good to make sure that people can't join the meeting until the host is there. That way they're not also lingering on while the host leaves at the end. So that's something that's good to do. Control who enters the meeting. That's probably one of the most important things, is controlling who enters and monitoring your participants. So the moderator really should know who's on the call. We do a pretty good job of that at our organization. If we don't recognize a certain number or some sort of person that might be logging in with a name that we don't recognize, we'll do a roll call. And if we can't account for everybody that's on that call, we'll shut down the call and we'll start up a new one. So it's really important to make sure that the participants that are on your call are people that you really want there. And then disabling the video. So if you really need to get secure, you can disable video as well. I'll cover this slide, and Brian, you can chime in. Brian's the network expert, and I am not. So, but I think I know a little bit about networks to be able to explain that. He can correct my mistakes. But a virtual private network when we a virtual private, so send all your workers at home. They're working from home. They've got internet connectivity, but they still need resources to be able to connect into your office environment. And so what typically is stood up is a virtual private network. So it's basically a access to your corporate network. And so it's it's just like sitting at your office, but you're remote from home, and you've got access to all those office resources, servers, ERP systems, printers, all that kind of stuff, file storage and all that. So you're able to connect to all that. You have to be really careful. So a couple of things, one is make sure you have the right infrastructure provision to be able to do that. So most organizations, if they're already up and running, they've thought through the license issue, they've thought through the number of connection issues. If you haven't thought through that and you're planning to enable more remote workers from home over the next couple of weeks, that's definitely something to think about. Do you have enough licenses? Is your VPN infrastructure able to handle the number of connections that you need to allow people to connect into? And the other thing is just to be careful in how it's configured. So there's something called split tunneling, and that can be very, very nice. So when you're connected into your office environment through your VPN, if you can get to your local network, your local printers, network attached printers, or other network resources at the same time you're VPNing in to your office environment, that means that you're allowing split tunneling. You can get to two separate networks at the same time. What that also creates is the ability for a cyber criminal to use your PC as a bridge from your home network into your office network. So if you're not careful and your systems aren't patched and you don't have the right security in place and all that stuff, a cyber criminal could get into your home network, which a lot of people's routers are not patched and firmware is not updated, and it's not as secure as an office network environment. They can penetrate into your home network, use your home PC, which is connected to your home network, and it's also connected to your work network to then pivot and get access to your corporate resources. So split tunneling, it's a good idea to just not even do it and to keep it off altogether, but if it's necessary, just to make sure that it's configured properly so that you're not creating unnecessary risk to be able to access your network environment. So Brian, anything I need to clean up with that?
No, you did a good job, Jimmy. We just thought that you did good. Organizations need to make sure that the patching that they were doing in their work environment is actually being done across the VPN on those remote systems, just because the vast majority of compromises and vulnerabilities occur against unpatched systems. And then, I already touched on the fact that, there's a little bit of a blur now between company and home network. So it's just something to educate users on. So, you covered everything.
Good deal. Annie, any questions so far while we get to the last slide?
We had a couple questions come through, one regarding the Zoom hacking. One person wants to know, could their credentials be stolen from a Zoom meeting?
Yeah, so there's actually been a couple of, even this week, vulnerabilities that were released about Zoom. Most organizations aren't using their network credentials, like their company credentials, for Zoom logins. So it is possible that with some of the vulnerabilities that have been released, that credentials could be stolen, but generally not credentials to other sites themselves. So it's something to be aware of, to use a secure password associated with it. And then you can actually check your logs just to see if somebody's logged in with your Zoom credentials. We've been pretty big fans of Zoom, but there's been some really bad things released about Zoom over the last 3 or 4 weeks that are probably making us take a harder look at it. For instance, Zoom is selling private information to Facebook, which is, they're actually being investigated for that. And then a number of vulnerabilities that are coming out associated with the Zoom platform. So here's my overall recommendation, is to have some standards inside your organization for how you do remote collaboration, whether it's GoToMeeting, whether it's Zoom, whether it's Google Hangouts, and then, or WebEx, and then to make sure that you monitor the news for vulnerabilities associated with those so that you understand the risks that are being presented to your organization. So for instance, all the Zoom information that's come out over the last several weeks, it makes you think maybe we should look at a different product or see how Zoom reacts to this, to see if they're going to secure their product since so many people are using it. That's a really good question, though.
So you actually kind of answered the next question as well. They were wondering what's the most secure video conference site, or if there even is one.
I would say all software has vulnerabilities. So, I would say that none of them are ultra secure in general. Generally, I'm a big fan of single sign-on, where you use your network credentials for cloud provided utilities. This may be an instance where it's good to have a separate login to like a WebEx or a Zoom or something like that, not to integrate it with your environment, just because it seems like there's a lot of vulnerabilities that are popping up. But all of the tools, WebEx, Zoom, all of them have had vulnerabilities that have been released, and so it just really speaks to the importance of monitoring what those are and making sure that those Zoom clients, WebEx clients, things like that, those are getting updated like they're supposed to in your environment to make sure that as vulnerabilities are released, they're mitigated.
And Gartner produces a Magic Quadrant report, and they've done it on collaboration tools as well, that gives you a perspective of which ones are kind of leading and providing good capabilities and leading the market. And there's a group of 5 or 6 of them that are up there in that very mature space. So I would say, sticking with some of the more mature ones are probably going to allow you to stay a little more protected.
And it looks like our next question you guys are about to start discussing. Could you talk a little bit about two-factor authentication?
Yeah, so we are huge proponents. Just, Jimmy mentioned we do security assessments. We really work with organizations to implement what's called multi-factor authentication. So used to be several years ago, organizations just protected their environments with a username and password. And really, passwords are easily cracked. They're also we found that our users just often can give them away. They can be deceived easily into clicking into a email that looks like it's Office 365 login, and it's really a fake page. And so you really want to be protecting your VPN environment, your remote access environment, and any cloud services that you have with multi-factor authentication. And so what that is in addition to having something like a password, it's either something you are, like a fingerprint or an eye scan, or something you have, like a phone. That's my favorite, right? Nobody leaves home without their phone anymore. So that's the easiest thing to deploy. So you've probably seen it with banking apps and different tools that are out there where you log in, you get a text message or you get a prompt that says, hey, I'm trying to log in. That's the best way that you can improve your perimeter security, is to make sure you have multi-factor authentication turned on for that. Great question. So without any other questions, and Annie, we'll give you another chance to pipe in at the end, just some final recommendations to touch on here, and that is just really look at those remote services that have been deployed to lower your risk. We mentioned our remote desktop protocol. We've talked about VPN. We just talked about multi-factor authentication, really for all your users, but even for your administrative accounts inside your organization. So, if your administrators are using multi-factor authentication just to do their normal jobs, the goal of any attacker is really to get that administrator access in a network. So you can protect your internal network with MFA as well. Make sure you're training your users, letting them know about these scams that are coming up, reassuring them that where information will come from your company and from the United States, or from any states that you may work in and sell as well. We talked about backups. Jimmy talked about ransomware. We do a lot of assessments where organizations have backups that are just stored right on their overall network, that they're not stored on tape or to some type of cloud provider. And that's a real risk from a ransomware perspective. So we have a number of organizations that have been hit with ransomware, that the ransomware impacted their servers and their backup servers. And so if you don't have something offline, like a tape backup or a cloud backup, you're really at higher risk for having to pay a ransom, because the best way to recover from a ransomware attack is with a good backup strategy in general. And you need to test those backups on a regular basis. We've had some heartbreak with some clients where they thought they were backing up, but when they went to restore, they found out their backups hadn't been working for several months. develop a business continuity plan just to think about how you'll react in different situations. I know that people right now are in the midst of obviously a really big situation that's occurring right now, but there is more business continuity planning that you could be doing right now to think about other scenarios down the road throughout the year that could impact your business and its ability to operate. And then the final thing is to, you know, if you're concerned about your overall security, whether it's from an internal standpoint of where you need some help, or whether you have a managed service provider and they're doing a great job of keeping your network running, but you're concerned about perhaps how well they're doing at securing the information. This is just an example of an assessment that Elliott Davis performs. We do an assessment against the Center for Internet Security Controls, and these are the top 20 cyber controls that organizations should be looking at. This is a scorecard that we come up with because we've really found that everybody, doesn't matter whether it's an IT person or the CEO, everybody understands a grade. And so we've come up with a way to grade how organizations are doing. And this also helps organizations measure, if they invest in their security program, how they're improving. So this is a great way to look at your organization and to get some clarity on what you need to do to improve your overall cybersecurity. A lot of people are selling magic bullets, magic products that are supposed to fix everything. And so it's very difficult for organizations to figure out where to invest. So this is just a real cognitive way for you to take a look at where do I need to take the first step and where do I need to spend some money to improve our overall program.
Annie, did you have any more questions?
We do not have any additional questions. Jeremy, would you like to add anything?
Sure. Thanks, Annie. Thanks again, everybody, for showing up for this. Thanks to Jimmy and Brian and Elliott Davis for putting this together for us. If you've been following us for the last few weeks, you know we've been putting together a playlist with these webinars in them after the fact. So if someone wasn't able to get here today, check back with our playlist on our website in a few days, and this should be there. Thanks again, everyone, for pulling this together.
Great. So we'll go ahead and close this out. That concludes today's webinar. Thank you again for joining us. And we again want to thank the Chamber for partnering with Elliott Davis. All attendees will receive a follow-up survey and a copy of this presentation. If you have any questions or if you're interested in additional information on understanding your business's cybersecurity, please reach out to either Jimmy or Brian. Their contact info is listed on the screen, or you can email cyber@elliottdavis.com. Thanks, everyone.